Brooke was with Franco Harris yesterday, as was our dear friend Chris Mad Dog Russo. When I posted something on Twitter this morning about Franco Harris, I was besieged with people saying, I just heard him on your radio show yesterday on Sirius XM. So, Chris, I will start with you. You, like I, are certainly old enough to have watched his whole career, understand what he meant as a player. You spoke to him yesterday. What are your thoughts this morning?
Well, it's unbelievably eerie. 50th anniversary is on Friday of the actual game. You just mentioned Raiders-Steelers. That was the first historical playoff win for Pittsburgh. They had never won a playoff game prior to this game. And then, of course, they won 4 Super Bowls, and he appeared in 6 championship games. He was lively yesterday, sharp as attack, knew all about the play. A lot of controversy because, remember, in those days, the rule was you could not have an offensive player tip the ball to another offensive player, and the Raiders always thought that the ball hit Fuqua. It did not. It hit, obviously, Jack Tatum. And then everybody thought in Raider land that the ball hit the ground. Franco said, yes, not the case. I caught the ball. He also said he kind of blacked out. He doesn't really have a lot of memory of the play, and then he runs the ball into the end zone. He made a good point yesterday about the actual play. Remember, in those days, if you fell down, the play was over. And this was the last play of the game. And he caught the ball at the 50-yard line. They would have lost. And he made sure he didn't fall down when he bent over to catch the ball. And he had a lot of momentum. Everybody else was kind of stationary when the ball was in the air. He was going forward. So once he caught it, you knew that he was going to be untouched. You know, this started the Steeler dynasty. I mean, this is simply this play that you see, Bradshaw, 4th down, the great call by Kirk Gowdy and Al DeRogatis. This play started the Steelers. Them and the Cowboys in the 70s, and this play, this win, started their run.
And it really changed the way pro football has been appreciated in this country and has been followed in this country ever since. And I have said many times, if any one of you who have ever flown into the airport in Pittsburgh have seen the statue of Franco Harris catching that football, and Brooke Pryor obviously has done that hundreds of times. And Brooke, you sent me a note that you were with Franco Harris yesterday. What can you tell us about him and about that?
Yeah, Greeny, you mentioned the statue. That was exactly why I went to talk to Franco yesterday to ask him about the process of making the statue, what the statue means to him. He told me initially that statue is only supposed to be up 6 months. And he said, but it's still standing. And it is eerie and it's surreal that I was with him yesterday, and he took so much time to not only talk with me sitting in front of the statue's twin at the Heinz History Center, but when we finished, there was a family, a dad and his 2 girls, Reese and Mimi, 15 and 11, and they said, hey, Franco, would it be okay to get a picture? They didn't just get a picture, they got a whole history lesson. Franco, the first thing he said was, well, what do you guys know about the 1970s? One of the girls said, well, my mom was born then. And Franco proceeded to give them, an entire just lesson about the play, about the Steelers, about what it started. And it wasn't just that, he asked them about the sports that they play, golf and tennis. He told them he played golf at Penn State. And then he took the picture with them, and then he stood there talking to them for a couple more minutes. His schedule was jam-packed this week. His wife, Donna, was standing right there, and she kept saying, Franco, we got to go. Franco, we have things to do. And he stood there, and he kept talking with them. And when I think of Franco Harris, that's what I think of. He's so humble, was so kind and generous with his time. I mean, this is probably the most photographed man in Pittsburgh, gets stopped all the time because he still looks like that 22-year-old that made the catch for the Immaculate Reception. And yet he had time for everyone. That's what I'll think of when I think of Franco Harris.
That video that you just saw and this picture that you were seeing now, again, were taken yesterday as Franco was with Brooke Pryor, and that is the twin, as she says, of the statue that you see when you fly into the airport. And Chris, I cannot pretend to have known Franco Harris well, but having been around him just a few times, I have personally been able to witness what everyone says, is that he was as humble a superstar as there has ever been. And there was a moment in time when he was as famous as any football player. In the 1970s, he was as famous a player as there was. He was a member of the one-name club. Franco, you didn't need to say the last name. And yet he was such a gentleman and such a humble person. And that, I'm thinking about that this morning more than I'm thinking about all of the accomplishments on the field.
I remember he wore that great number 32. A lot of the great athletes wore number 32, and Jim Brown wore number 32, which is interesting too. And he almost represents a lot what that Steeler team was about. A lot of those Steeler teams, even Bradshaw, was kind of, a lot of people think he was a great quarterback. A lot of humble guys, they had that's 9 Hall of Famers on that team. I mean, there's a lot of great players, and a lot of them blended into a team phenomenally. Remember, that 72 team did not have Swan and did not have Stallworth. They were not on that team yet. They got there in 74. But think about the Hall of Famers on the 72 game with the Raiders. There's about 15 Hall of Famers on the field.
On both sides, yeah.
Both coaches, both quarterbacks. I mean, when you think about it, and listen, they had a great defense. They won their first 2 Super Bowls with defense. They won their last 2 Super Bowls with offense. They beat Dallas 35-31. You remember the famous Hollywood Henderson thing?
Yeah.
Bradshaw can't spell cat if you spot on the C and the
A, yeah.
And then, of course, they beat the Rams 31-19. The first 2, they ran with him running the ball with Rocky Bleier and their great defense. So they won 2 with the offense and 2 with the defense.
Yeah, the second one, they were losing in the fourth quarter of that game against the Rams and came back and won it. And as you see on your screen, Franco Harris remains, to this day, the all-time leading rusher in Super Bowl history. Brooke, and oh, by the way, you mentioned the coaches. The coach of the Raiders was, of course, the legendary John Madden, who went to his grave insisting that the play was illegal. And that's a conversation I had with him, and anyone who wanted to, he would tell you he never believed the Immaculate Reception should have been able to count. It bothered him to his last day. Brooke, what can you tell us about the plans for this weekend? I know it is too soon for them to have adjusted anything, and I don't know that there's any reason that they will have to. So what are the plans for this weekend as, again, they have the 50th anniversary commemoration game Saturday against the Raiders. They are retiring his number 32 at halftime. Can you walk us through what we should expect, which will now be, I think, one of the really, truly emotional nights in the history of pro football?
Yeah, and Greeny, it's not just going to be emotional on Saturday. Friday is the anniversary of the actual play, and the organization has planned this massive celebration honoring it. There's going to be, an availability with Franco and the other members of the team. And then at the exact time and moment that the catch was made, they were all going to go out to the spot that is marked outside of Heinz Field, where the old Three Rivers Stadium was, exactly where he made that catch, and replay the radio broadcast from that. I haven't heard yet what, if anything, will be altered with that, but this was already a massive weekend in Pittsburgh, and I can imagine that it's only going to get greater because, as sad as we all are right now, I think that the city wants to honor and celebrate Franco and everything that he meant to this franchise, to the city, to the fans. And one of the cool things that I learned yesterday, if you go in the Pittsburgh Sports Museum inside the Heinz History Center, there's the actual turf from the Immaculate Reception. They have an X in lights illuminating the spot. Franco had that in his garage for a long time when they cut up the turf from that season. It's the original turf from Three Rivers Stadium. He said he ran over there when he knew they were ripping it up, and it was just hours before they were supposed to shred up the turf. And he said, "Hey, can I have that?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." They cut it up. He kept it in his garage, and now it's in the museum. And I just get chills thinking about it, but this is going to be a week that, is obviously sad, and it's tragic, the timing, but I think that everyone is going to pour out to celebrate a life and a man who was as great a player, and an even better human than he was a player.
That's beautifully said. Brooke, thank you. And obviously, you'll be covering that for us. Chris is here to do First Take, as always. Thank you so much.
And Villapiano is going to go to that this weekend, too. And he's the linebacker who didn't make the tackle, had a chance to make a tackle.
From the Raiders, yeah. One of the great players. Names like Phil Villapiano are names that those of us who are old enough will always remember. That's where pro football, as we know it today, was born. If you are my age, a little piece of your childhood died today. Rest in peace, Franco Harris. We will continue with the rest of what will be a normal day here as we go on to the rest of the news, but it's very, very sad today. Franco Harris, at the age of 72, has died. You're watching Get Up on ESPN, and we will be right back.